IHOP. My curiosity often gets the best of me. Sometimes it gets me fired. One time I was waiting tables at the IHOP in downtown Nashville, back before they demolished it to make a parking lot. We were on the corner of 21st Avenue and Broadway, right across the street from Vanderbilt, and just a few blocks from Music Row, where most of the record companies have their offices, and just a few minutes' walk from most of the nightclubs. Back then, it was the only place downtown that served food after 3 in the morning, so we would get the works. Bums wandered in to buy coffee with their spare change, and the bar bands came to eat after gigs. Some nights the crowd was mostly out-of-towners, and the parking lot would fill up with those beige Cavaliers convention types seem to rent when they come to Nashville. I've always wondered how that got to be the official rental car, but I've never had the chance to ask anyone. Most nights we had at least a handful of booths crammed with students, each of them hopped up on stackers and no-dos, textbooks spread out and getting stained with bacon grease, raspberry jam, and maple syrup. That bunch always whispered and looked cross-eyed at the 8th Avenue hookers who came in at 4:30, but you couldn't help noticing they all had the same dilated pupils. In that crowd, a man could come in and have a seat without taking up too much of my attention. I just gave him a menu and a glass of water and went back to rolling silverware. When he pulled out a pencil and a spiral notebook and started staring into space and scrawling in the thing like one of those psychics on TV, though, I gave him a second look. He was pushing 40 with a flaky bald spot on the back of his gray head, wearing John Lennon glasses, a black polo shirt, and faded Arizona jeans. I reset all the empty tables in my section and went over to the drink island to try and get a good look at what he was writing. He was sitting at table 9, a window booth with a view of the alley. Why did they bother with a window, I always wondered, on the back of the row? The island was against the wall between 9 and 12. They should have called it a station since it was against the wall, but you couldn't tell that to the night manager, Rita. I tried when she was first training me. "Charlie," she said, "I'm in charge, and if I want to call it an island, then it's an island." She reminded me of my dad. His favorite phrases were, "because I said so," and "none of your business." He'd come home from work every night and put on a record, then sit in his chair drinking with his eyes closed till he fell asleep. I don't think I ever saw him eat supper. You could tell by the record what kind of mood he was in, though. The Beatles were a good sign. The Stones were not. I remember one night, I guess I was about 10 or 12, I got interested in his work for some reason. I kept asking him about it, and he kept telling me to shut up. I ended up getting a spanking to the tune of Satisfaction. That day in training, I wanted to argue with Rita about the drink island, but I had just gotten fired from the job I had before that at Chick-fil-A for aggravating the manager about those cows they use on the billboards. I mean, it's a chicken place, right? What do the cows have to do with anything? Sure, the cows want you to eat chicken instead of burgers, but it's a bit confusing to the customers, I'd say. Bill, that was the manager's name, didn't want to talk about it, so I called the district manager, but he said that was a corporate matter, and then Bill got all out of sorts about me going over his head. He said something ugly, I don't remember exactly what, and I punched the ice machine to keep from punching Bill. He told me not to come back after that, not even for chicken nuggets. Point being, I didn't want to stare at a customer and risk getting into trouble like that with Rita. I couldn't help myself, though, so I started a new pot of coffee and then stood there wiping down the island's counter and watched the scrawler. Like a lot of restaurants, IHOP got the music piped in from a satellite company. There weren't any commercials, but once in a while there would be a couple of seconds of dead air between one song and the next. I tried to ask Rita about that, too, but she just shook her head and told me to shut the fuck up with my dumbass questions. Anyhow, REM was playing, and when the song faded out, the scrawler waved his free hand at me. "Country ham, mashed potatoes, and a Sprite," he said. I could barely understand, but I couldn't tell if he sounded Canadian to me because he really was from Canada, or if that was just the way he sounds when he talks that fast. I can't really do his voice, though. I grabbed a glass for his drink, and the music started again. I sat his glass of Sprite on the table in front of him and watched as he wrote. His writing was large, neat, and all capital letters, like the chart at the eye doctor's office. He's the kind of guy who's always passing by, who never has time to spend. The beginning of Leona Ness's Charm Attack, which had just started playing. Just above that, on the same page, he had lyrics from Everybody Hurts. I could tell he had missed the beginning and started with, "Sometimes everything is wrong." The REM was like a single paragraph on the page, ending with, "No, no, no, no." I guess he didn't consider Na Na's actual lyrics. and he had started a new paragraph for Leona. I wanted to ask him about it, but when I looked at him, he had this creepy bug-eyed stare, so I just went back to the kitchen to turn in his order. Joe, the cook, gave me the finger when I tagged the order to his spinner, so I didn't say a word to him. He was still mad at me for having him remake some pancakes he burned the night before. Cooks, they hate you for that. Back there all day or night with the swirl of burning bacon grease reek and sweet pancake batter bubbling, they can get as green as moldy bread. They spit in the food sometimes, sure, but it's a miracle they don't vomit on it. I walked back out to table 4, 2 tables down, but on the other aisle away from number 9. I sat down with my back to the scrawler and facing Stacy. She was a regular who would walk over from Private Dancer when she had finished humping the Music Row crowd. Back then, Nashville had more than 40 whorehouses operating all over town. Most of them were down on 8th Avenue or in even worse parts of town. Private Dancer was the only one south of I-40 and the last to get closed. I read about the whole crackdown in the scene, and I still think they waited so long to close Private Dancer so they could be sure the word was out. They didn't want to end up busting in on some bigwig from BMG or Curb Records, both of which were a block away from that particular whorehouse. Record producers get arrested for DUI, not solicitation. The IHOP went out of business right after that, and I'll always wonder if the lack of late-night hookers business was part of the reason. I was answering phones for the Home Shopping Network by then, though, so I don't know for sure. According to Stacy, Private Dancer was supposed to be for upscale clients, and she refused to talk to the girls from the houses when they came in. You wouldn't think there would be class distinctions between prostitutes, but she sure acted like it mattered. I'll say this for her, though. She was never all whacked out on Dilaudid like they were. That was in the paper, too, that all the hookers were on Dilaudid. I guess the average reader didn't know anything about that, but anybody who's ever actually talked to a prostitute would tell you it's the sort of job that demands prescription-strength painkillers. You see that guy at table 9, I asked her. Stacy nodded. What do you guess he's writing over there? I don't know, she said, soaking her French toast in blackberry syrup. Grocery list? Suicide note? It's the songs, I told her. He's copying down the lyrics to what's playing. So? Stacy didn't give a shit. Why would anybody do that? I asked her. Charlie, it's been a rough night. Don't bother me with this shit. If she'd had a good night, and for Stacy a good night meant making a lot of money and not having to deal with anybody who was too fat or smelly or rough, she would talk to me like we had grown up together or something. If she'd had a bad night, a night when she didn't make much money or somebody had thrown her across the room or something, she wouldn't say much more than her order. Nights like that, I thought Stacy might be better off doing the drugs, since she wouldn't even consider the idea of finding a new line of work. Even on good nights, I couldn't get her to talk to me about why she wouldn't just quit. Since she didn't want to talk, I got up to leave. But she tapped her empty coffee mug, so I took it with me to get her a refill. I was standing at the drink island pouring the decaf when the scrawler sneezed. Bless you, I said. He ignored me and kept right on scratching in his notebook. I watched his writing get smaller and smaller as Leona faded out. He dampens every explosion and he stamps on every emotion. There was no dead air this time, but when Joe Jackson's piano introduced Stranger Than You, the scrawler took a big gulp of his Sprite. At a bar on 43rd at 1:45, he wrote. I went back to the kitchen for the scrawler's meal, and Joe gave me 2 birds that time. The food looked okay, but I wouldn't have eaten it. When I worked there, sometimes I hung around the kitchen to see if I could catch Joe doing something to an order, but Rita would always send me back out on the floor. I walked out to the scrawler's table and set the plate down next to his notebook. He didn't look up at me. He slid the plate around to the center of the table with his left hand and kept on writing with his right. I'm not sure what you are, sang Joe Jackson.